Sondai K. Lester, former educator, author of the book Who Dropped the Ball on Our Kids. This is my second book. First book was Connections Remembered, that was written in conjunction with my wife, Lindiwe Lester. This book, Who Dropped the Ball on Our Kids, is a book written as a result of my experience as an educator and my recognition that the school was a political institution and it was designed to create the situation where students accepted the organization and distribution of power and their place in that power system unquestionably, and they had to figure out how to fit into something that was already designed for them and find their designated place. Who dropped the ball? The title comes out of my experience with two other black male teachers who we worked together in trying to infuse an African-centered approach to education, and we would try to expose kids to material that gave them a more positive identity formation. And we worked hard to bring in materials and resources and approach to teaching. And we did it while we were teaching, and then later on, as we went different ways, I look back on it and say, well, we didn't keep pushing, we didn't keep emphasizing, we didn't keep trying to influence teachers who came behind us to do this. And the question in my mind was, did we drop the ball? Should we have done more? Should we have tried to influence more teachers? Should we have tried to put together more material that could give teachers an awareness of what needed to be done and how it should be done? So, who dropped the ball started with, did we drop the ball? Then did other administrators drop the ball? Then did parents drop the ball in terms of making sure the kids were resilient in the face of an institution that was trying to diminish them as human beings? One of the interesting things I learned as I researched the book was how many authors earlier, white authors, educational researchers, understood the political nature and goal of the school. Uh, Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher back in 1916, writing in the magazine Atlantic, uh, stated that the school is a political institution. It's designed to make it possible for one group to flourish at the expense of other groups. And so that determines what is taught and what is not taught. So the school, therefore, is an extension of those who are in power, and it supports the maintenance of that power. Ralph Tyler, also an educator, back in the 40s, talked about the school has one of two purposes. Either it's designed to have students fit into the status quo and go along with things as it is, or the school exists that students become radical and are focused on transforming the world as it is. So there were others who understood this purpose, that is, it was there to control people and get them to go along with what had been defined as the way things should be. And so what was interesting to me was, as I look back on my own education, is all the gaps in my own knowledge base, all the things I hadn't been exposed to, and I began to recognize that I wasn't exposed to a lot of things that would have given me a positive sense of identity as related to being black in America. The hidden curriculum is a crucial concept for educators to understand as they try to teach black students. Hidden curriculum is a concept derived by Jean Agnon, but also emphasized by Guru and Penna, that talks about there's the overt curriculum, what's written down on paper when parents get the syllabus or what the kids are going to be taking, the kind of classes. The overt curriculum is out there, but what people don't realize, and which is kind of insidious and powerful, is an underlying hidden curriculum that has the political issue of the school as its purpose. So uh, Agnon realized that in her research that it was designating students or educating students based on class. So if you were in a lower class of the population, you had a certain kind of curriculum, and a certain kind of curriculum was getting you to be obedient, to memorize things, to not think, to go along with orders, because you were going to be in a situation as a worker, and they made sure that if you're going to be working, you were not going to be challenging the authority of those who oversaw the work you were doing. So in the school, the teacher would be at the front of the room, the kids would be sitting in chairs, the teacher represented the authority symbol, and then it wasn't necessarily important for the students to get the right answer. The the main thing for the student was to be obedient and go along with what the teacher determined. And basically, you pass based on following those rules, not necessarily by how much you were doing academically or how well you were doing academically. And then the second hidden curriculum was the middle class, which they were being prepared to be the managers who would oversee the lower class, and they had to be able to manage people and to be able to think a little bit and to solve problems. So their curriculum was different. They emphasized you had to get the right answer, you had to figure out how to do this, and you had to have some independence in terms of how you were able to operate. So you were given some independence in the curriculum and the pedagogy. You were assigned different tasks, maybe research papers, that kind of thing, to give you a sense of you could think on your own. And then the third level, which was the third and the fourth, was the professional and the executive elite. And now we're talking about people who are corporate executives, those who would be running the economy. And their schools were much more flexible. Teachers allowed kids to work independently. Often the teacher was not in the head of the classroom. Many times the students would come to school before the bell working on projects, stay after school working on projects, leave the room working on projects. They had some schools I've seen have rooms where kids could have couches and they can sit around and collaborate and figure out problems that had been designated for them to resolve. So it was a whole different learning experience and a whole different environment. We're preparing them to function on a totally different level of society. So each segment, race or class, had their own school preparing them for their designated position in society. I think it's important to have African-centered education because what we don't realize is that how much it influences identity formation. And when I talk about identity formation, I'm talking about answering the basic existential questions of who am I and who are we, and how that motivates or guides human behavior. If you think that you're less than anybody else just because the color of your skin, then your behavior is going to be guided in a certain way, and you're going to be limited in what you can conceive and your ambitions and what you can achieve as an individual, but and even more importantly as a group. So if we're looking at Eurocentric curriculum, then it tells you you're less than. You never did anything. Africa's the dark continent. You were a heathen. Your people were beastly. They didn't have any knowledge and they were saved by white folks. We have to understand that that's not true, and we have to be given a different basis to build culture so that we can have a different way of thinking of ourselves than thinking about each other, which would affect our ambitions, our expectations, and how we interact with one another. And that whole cultural impact as a result of what happens in school is crucial, and that has to be emphasized, and people have to be aware of that so we can change the whole dynamic of what happens in the community, how we relate to each other. Now it's less than versus less than. So if I hurt you, there's no big thing because you less than too. You ain't nobody, I ain't nobody. So hurting you, exploiting you doesn't mean a thing. So we have to change the center, the perspective of how we see the world and how we define ourselves in relationship to how we see the world. And that's a whole cultural issue. I think the biggest issue facing black people or black students today is the urgency of finding an education that will allow them to be resilient enough to first ward off the impact of all the negative societal influences, both inside and outside of school, that would diminish them as human beings, and then to be able to come together and find a way to build a lifestyle and a community that gives them a chance to function more independently and more in a way that is meaningful in terms of their development. So it requires better teachers, it requires better administrators, more aware administrators, and really important, it requires parents who realize what's happening, what's being done to their children, and pushing back against that in the household, building an environment that gives their children the kind of strength and resilience to be able to ward off these attacks, and then supportive in their children in terms of encouraging them to stretch out, to have dreams, to be able to work hard to reach those dreams. As educators, you can help mitigate against this reality by reflecting on and implementing strategies to create, augment, or find an educational process that builds a healthy racial identity among African American young people. Alternative schooling approaches must fortify their young people by fostering identity formation that enables them to resist the obstacles placed in their past and then pursue both education and aspirations that ignite their deep well of talents to achieve at high and even unparalleled levels. It's these free thinking, talented young people who are needed to advance and liberate Black communities locally and globally. So let's not drop the ball anymore.